Hello, and welcome to the Permobil Academy webinar series. I'm Tricia Garvin, the moderator for today's webinar titled Navigating the Funding Maze, Process and Resources for Obtaining CRT. When you logged into the webinar, you are automatically muted upon entry to keep the noise down for everyone else. If you have any questions or comments as we proceed live, you can type them into the questions chat box on your GoToWebinar panel. We will leave some time at the end for questions at the end of the webinar as well. If we don't get to your questions live, we'll get back to you via email afterwards. In the GoToWebinar panel, there's also a handouts tab. This is where you'll find today's handouts that you can download during the live event. We do not have professional CEUs for today's webinar. However, for the live event attendees, an email with a link to fill out a certificate of attendance will be emailed once this webinar is closed. And as we get started, we'd like to first learn a little about who all is with us today. So we're gonna launch a quick poll question. So we'd like to know, who are you? If you could select one of the choices, whether you're an individual or consumer of CRT, a PT or other clinician, ATP, you work for a funding source, or maybe you're just a family member, not just, you are a family member of an individual utilizing CRT. So give you all just a second more to answer. Looks like we're pretty evenly split. We've got about almost 40% of folks utilizing CRT, about 25% therapists, clinicians, and about 30% ATP suppliers. So really great. Thank y'all. And now I would like to turn it over to our speakers. I'd like to introduce Ashley and Jim.
Hi, this is Jim Stevenson. I'm the reimbursement and coding manager here at Permobil. I've spent about 16 years or so in this industry dealing specifically with complex rehab on the funding and coding side. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Detterbeck. I'm a physical therapist, ATP and SMS. I am the Regional Clinical Education Manager for the Upper Midwest with Permobil. At Permobil, we believe that every person has the right to move regardless of their ability, and not just be moved, but move themselves independently. And when you believe that this is true, the independent mobility isn't just something that's medically necessary, but a basic human right. You take your products to an exciting places that sometimes seem a little different, places that you didn't originally plan, places that don't fit within the current medical model that we operate in today. So when you take this belief that independent mobility is a basic human right, and you have the ability to be creative from your leadership team, you act on that behalf. And you find yourself presenting solutions like those we are going to talk about today.
We're going to start talking about manual mobility here just a little bit first. You know, the coverage guidelines, it's very similar for all mobility products, you know, based on the national coverage determination, and, you know, the patient has to have a mobility limitation that prevents their ability to perform one or more mobility related activities of daily living. It's important to note that it's things such as is key, because that means that this list that they generally spell out is not an all-inclusive list. So toileting, feeding, dressing, grooming, and bathing in the customary locations of their home. So that you know, there doesn't need to be you know, any type of modifications made, or you know, anything along those lines to accommodate this. And what is a mobility limitation? It either, one, it prevents the client from accomplishing an activity of daily living entirely. It puts them or others at heightened risk, secondary to their attempts to do their MRIDLs. And lastly, if they're not able to perform their activities in a reasonable time frame. It does somebody no good if they're capable of, you know, let's say getting to the restroom, but it takes them 10 minutes to get there. If they needed to get there in 5, that doesn't do them much good. So those are the types of things, you know, as far as reasonable time that they're talking about in that language. Additionally, their limitation can't be sufficiently or safely resolved by using a cane or a walker. This what we're talking about here, it stands for manual chairs, power wheelchairs, the whole 9 yards. So as we move further throughout this talk this morning, or well, I guess this afternoon now, we're not going to go through this same thing because it's the same thing for power also. The patient's or client's home has adequate access space and surfaces to maneuver their manual wheelchair. It's going to significantly improve their ability to participate in their MRDLs, and they're going to use it on a regular basis in the home. They've not expressed an unwillingness to use the manual wheelchair, and basically what that means is if somebody comes in and they're not really, if the client themselves make comments about not using the equipment, or they're not interested in having a wheelchair or something along those lines, you need to vet that out before you move forward, because funding sources do the secret shopper type calls after a chair has been delivered, just to say, hey, how are you enjoying your new K5 wheelchair, or how are you, how's it going with your power chair? They want to make sure that it's not just sitting in a back room, collecting laundry, or something along those lines. When it comes to manual, they have to have sufficient upper extremity function and physical and mental capabilities to operate the equipment safely. And lastly, if they have a caregiver who's available, willing, and able to provide assistance with the wheelchair. Moving on to K4, K5, this is a question that we get a pretty good amount of stuff coming up as far how do I justify a K5 over a K4 or other manual wheelchairs for that matter. First, for K5 coverage, they have to be a full-time manual wheelchair user. Specifications that separate K5 from K4 is axle configuration, the camber of the wheels, if they need certain seat depths and angles, and also if you can medically justify a rigid frame for somebody. A rigid frame is only available on a K5 chair. Required documentation, there has to be an evaluation throughout the process by a licensed PT or OT, or a physician who has the knowledge and training to do this type of service. Typically that's not being done by a physician, but they can do it if they're able. And then the last thing is it has to be provided by a supplier that employs an ATP, and that ATP has to have direct in-person involvement in the product selection. The documentation, description of the client's routine activities, what are they encountering every day? When it's Medicare, you have to focus primarily on things in the home, but with some other funding sources, being able to get to work, being able to go to the grocery store, being able to do childcare and things of that nature, are things that you want to mention in the documentation. And then what is their level of independence going to be with the use of the wheelchair? Is this going to prevent them from needing any assistance from other folks, a caregiver, or additional equipment that helps the process along as well? And then, lastly, and it has to be documented, what are the features that are necessary on the K5 wheelchair base that are not available on a lesser chair? And when you think lesser chair, that that includes, even though they're higher codes, but it also includes the K6 and K7 codes. So with it being heavy duty, or folks who have spasticity and so forth, we need to be able to make sure that this K5 is what's going to be necessary over any type of wheelchair base when it comes to that. Ashley, did you have anything to add on the documentation piece?
And from the clinician standpoint, when you go in to do, the difference between a K4 and a K5, clinically can be a little bit overwhelming. But the key points to remember as you're trying to justify this is, looking at what that chair capabilities are. So, is that patient needing a different type of seat depth, or do you need to have an axle adjustment or different camber that we can't get on a K4? In the grand scheme of things, a lot of our patients do. Almost everybody can benefit from a K5. If we think about shoulder preservation, we're not made to propel manually. You know, our shoulders are not built that way. So having that optimal configuration that we look for in a K5 can really, really benefit our patients. And so as you try to justify that jump from a K4 to a K5, or even you know, ruling out those lesser alternative options, really looking at how that chair and specializing that fit to that person is really going to make that longevity of that user more beneficial.
Moving on to titanium. Titanium upgrades have become, you know, increasingly more difficult over the last couple of years. CMS came out with a report stating that, you know, back in 1992-93 timeframe, when the K5 code was originally introduced to the code set, they claimed that they took into consideration any type of special materials, whether that be titanium or carbon fiber, you know, and any type of material that we're building chairs with, and claiming that they took the consideration of that extra expense for the materials into account when they developed the K5 allowable. And then over time, it just, you know, has, you know, it bumps up by the cost of living, you know, standards over time and whatnot. But based on the way that things are working currently, really the only way to provide titanium and utilize insurance benefits is to bill the entire chair as unassigned. To bill unassigned, you have to be a non-participating provider. And unfortunately, what this means is, rather than just paying out of pocket for the titanium upgrade itself, billing unassigned requires them to bill the entire chair unassigned, because you can't bill assigned or unassigned on the same claim. So you can't pick and choose claim lines to bill unassigned. You have to do the whole thing. So that would include the wheelchair base, that would include seating, any accessories and options, and plus the titanium upgrade. So it makes it a little bit financially more financially difficult for people to obtain titanium today. There is always the option for somebody to just pay cash out of pocket if that's something that you know, they have the ability to do. Obviously, we don't want people to be shortchanged on their insurance benefits. So, you know, we're fighting, you know, in Washington D.C. and with some folks at CMS at a high level to try and get the ability to provide just the titanium as an upgrade. We're trying to get that restored. Titanium costs the Medicare program $0. Okay, they don't pay for titanium. We're not asking them to pay for titanium. We just want to be able to offer people the freedom of choice to pick the product that best meets their needs and fits within their financial means. You know, it saves people money up front, you know, because they're not paying for an entire chair, they're just paying for the upgrades. So, you know, there's some bills being introduced, you know, with all the stuff that's going on in DC right now with the impeachment proceedings and things like that. You know, the government is not moving very quickly on other stuff because the impeachment stuff is such a focal point at this time. But there are a couple of bills that need to be passed before the end of the year, and we're hoping to be able to tie titanium, the complex rehab manual wheelchair accessories, you know, trying to get both of those bills in and pass through a larger piece of legislation before the end of the year. All that's, you know, remains to be seen. You know, it's hard to really predict what may happen, you know, just because there's so much other noise going on in DC right now. But there is stuff going on behind the scenes trying to get this resolved and taken care of going forward. And hopefully we'll have a resolution sometime in the near future.
So the reason that this fight is really important with titanium is titanium provides a lot of added medical benefits that really haven't been discussed, you know, over the years. Not only is it, you know, it has that prolonged durability for our high active users, it is definitely a stronger material, but by nature, the way that titanium acts, it is, you know, a vibrational dampening system as well. So if you think about our end users that are navigating uneven terrains or jumping over thresholds, or even just navigating the difference between carpet and wood floor, that little type of vibrational movement through the frame can really make or break their sitting tolerance, or help them lose, they'll lose position. So having that vibrational dampening property of titanium, which comes naturally to it, we can get our patients to just sit a lot better, as well as tolerate sitting a lot better. And then due to that, reduction in weight, you're also going to have a lot better shoulder preservation for our long-term manual users.
We're going to move on to Smart Drive now. Push activated power assist EO986. Probably the biggest challenge that we face in this is folks not being able to get power assist until they've been a manual wheelchair user for a year. A lot of folks could benefit and be, by being proactive, save their shoulders if the smart drive is added at the initial delivery of the chair. That's something that most funding sources are following that at this point in time. There are some exceptions that get made with some of the private insurances out there, but it just you have to ask. It's not something where going through a prior authorization process, or just picking up the phone and calling the insurance company and asking them. We're not asking for billing help. We're just wanting to understand what their processes are when it comes to coverage, and whether or not there are exceptions that can be made based on individual circumstances. Again, with the smart drive, it requires a specialty eval performed by a PT or OT, and basically they're just documenting the medical necessity for all the components that are going to be separately billable. And again, it has to be provided by a equipment supplier that employs a resident certified ATP, and they have to have direct in-person involvement in the selection for the product.
So when do you consider power assist? Outside of that 1 year window, there's a lot of things to kind of look at as we're starting to evaluate these patients. Looking at their body structure, what type of impairments are they facing by being utilizing a manual wheelchair? Is there range of motion deficits or strength deficits that maybe they truly can be a manual user, but just need that power assist for those long distance areas that they're going to fatigue in? Is there any cardiovascular or respiratory issues that are going to provide the same thing? Short distance, they do great, and the minute they have to try to navigate their school or their workplace, they start to have trouble with maintaining their cardiovascular system or their respiration. You think about all the activities that we do and our users have to do. Trying to carry something and push your manual chair at the same time can be considerably difficult. So our activities of daily living can be greatly improved with the use of a power assist device. Domestic activities such as shopping or housework really can be benefited with power assist. Our participation in work activities, school activities, recreation, being able to go across a dry soccer field to go see your child play in their soccer game can make or break a patient's day. So those are always great times to consider power assist, as well as what type of environment are they living in. Are they having to navigate ramps numerous times a day or go over different varied terrains? And there's a lot of personal ways to consider power assist. Just their lifestyle in general. They are a very active parent that's highly involved in their child's lives. Are they, a highly active career person who's having to negotiate long buildings or through airports on a frequent basis? There's always great ways to consider power assist, and sometimes it's not even considering power assist for our K5 users, but considering power assist for things that are a little out of the box. At Permobil, we really have pushed, considering those interesting things, putting power assist on pediatric manual, allowing those kids to preserve their shoulders early on, Or, power assist on a Tilton space. If you've ever pushed a Tilton space with a patient and all of their stuff, they're heavy, they're built heavy. So adding power assist, even, for our caregivers, yes, it's a caregiver convenience, but it's going to make life a lot easier for them long term. So really think about, mainly that in-home use, the access points of ramps in and out of the house, any high pile carpets or long hallways that they may be having to carry their laundry basket up and down the hallway, or navigating, different areas for cleaning or meal preparation. It's going to be a lot easier if you can put what you need on your lap to go from the refrigerator to your counter and not have to try to balance all the stuff and try to access, a normal propulsion technique without dumping your eggs or your coffee or whatever you're trying to maintain at the same time. So there's a lot of good related uses for the smart drive or power assist in general.
One thing that's important to remember is that smart drive does get reimbursed under capped rental. Basically what that means is rather than getting all of the funding and reimbursement for it upfront, it's billed out over a period of 13 months. And over that course of time, it makes it a little bit difficult because of the, from a provider perspective, it's a fairly reasonable outlay to acquire the product, and then to have to wait 13 months to collect all of the reimbursement. For some folks, that's a big issue. It disrupts the revenue cycle to some extent. Not that you don't get the money, and it's a good return as far as folks being able to make money and so forth. But what about other payers? State Medicaids, the coverage varies from state to state. There's still a few states out there. Texas is one that comes to mind that still does not recognize the E0986 code for smart drive. Based on our understanding, it was an oversight on their part, or at least that's what we were told when we initially asked about it. But this has been probably close to a year ago now that we had this conversation with them, and to my knowledge, they still have not done anything to affect that. So, depending on the funding source you're dealing with is going to, there may be some some things off the standard beaten path that would be requirements. And being able to sit here and go through all 50 states is not realistic, but states are paying for it. They are the payer of last resort. Private insurance, it's important to show the documented medical need, because a lot of times they have their own policies where they will take bits and pieces from other funding sources and what they do on a regular basis, and they will implement that into their policies as it makes sense for their membership. And then lastly, alternative funding. We do have a few slides on alternative funding later in the webinar, so we're not going to talk about that specifically now, but Smart Drive definitely is a product that can be considered through alternative funding, as well as a few other products that we'll discuss as we move forward here. Moving into power mobility, couple of big issues going on within the industry as far as power mobility, and it's not Medicare specific necessarily. One thing that I get asked about a lot is the F3 to F5 package. When do I choose the F3 to F5 package versus when do I choose a straight F5? Typically for Medicare and other payers who follow Medicare guidelines, it's generally better to order the package because it helps separate the dollars of the upgrade from the dollars of what the patient actually qualifies for. When you're dealing with the state Medicaid and some private insurance, again, they vary widely. But if they consider coverage for group 4 power wheelchairs, just in general, it's generally better to select the F5 or the F5 VS and run the claim through that way. There are some providers out there who are quoting out chairs both ways because they're not sure. of which way their funding source is going to go, and they're trying to save time up front, so they quote it both ways in order to have it in hand for whichever direction they have to go. You know, the F3 to F5, you know, bumps somebody from a group 3 to a group 4 chair. It includes standing and upgraded motors and suspension and all those sorts of things. So each of those things needs to be justified if you're expecting an insurance company to pay for that upgrade. If they're not paying for the upgrade, then it just, you know, you have a clear defined line of, okay, this is what insurance is going to pay, and then this upgrade package that insurance doesn't cover, you know, either goes to a secondary insurance source, a private pay, or, you know, maybe we look into some alternative funding options to get them the coverage they need. United Healthcare challenges. I don't know how many folks are actually dealing with United Healthcare on the call today, but it's such a big issue nationwide. I've been hearing this for probably the better part of this year. And basically, the biggest one is they're commonly approving 3 or more power seating actuators. So that could be tilt, recline, power legs, but they're denying the necessary expandable controller and wiring harness. Without the expandable controller and wiring harness, it bypasses all of the FDA mandated safety features on the chair. It takes away the ability to program, and quite honestly, without having that, you know, more expanded brain, or, you know, the controller, you know, it puts people at risk for using the chair. United Healthcare has this understanding that powered seating can be run on a chair, whether it be 1 or 2 actuators or 3 or 5 actuators. They feel that based on the way that policy language is written, that somebody can, you know, operate their functions entirely on switches without using an expandable controller, which from a technology perspective, that's something that can be done. The only thing that is none of us manufacture, whether that be Permobil or Quantum or Sunrise or Invacare or any of the other guys out there, none of us are going to allow somebody to run their chair entirely on switches without an expandable controller because of the liability and the safety concerns for the consumer. We've been having multiple conversations with them trying to get this resolved. It's kind of come down to they're agreeing to disagree with us for right now, and they're looking for clarification in the Medicare policies and the, you know, state Medicaid policies to change their interpretation of the rule. I mean, they understand what we're saying, but because of the black and white of the policy, their interpretation of that is that an expandable controller and wiring harness is not necessary when you have 3 or more seating actuators on the chair. We're still fighting that. You know, we've taken a united approach with this, where we have representation from Permobil and the other large manufacturers, where we've you know, approach United Healthcare to go in and do some education and trying to figure out what the resolution is going to be for this. So just wanted to give a quick update on that. This isn't something that's dead in the water. I think at some point we will have this resolved, but until we can get clarification in the policy language, I think we're going to continue to fight this battle. The other thing is they're denying the operation of seating actuators through the driver control, your E2310 or 2311. You know, this is something that has to be medically justified. This isn't a given. Just because they have, you know, a certain number of actuators on their chair doesn't automatically gain them coverage for a single actuator control or a multiple actuator control through the driver control. I think there's some confusion around that. When you have a power tilt, recline, power legs within those particular codes, it is mandated that there be an independent switch to operate those seating functions on the chair. But if somebody is unable to utilize those switches, either because of dexterity issues, or maybe when they're in certain positions in their chair, they can't see the switches to use, or you know, things along that line. That's the type of thing that we need to make sure that we're documenting and supporting when we're trying to get somebody the ability to operate those seating functions through their drive control. And then the last one is least costly alternatives. Most of you on the phone have probably heard the language least costly medically appropriate alternative. With United Healthcare, they've kind of taken the medically appropriate piece of that language out of the equation. There are people who are classic group 3, multiple power functions on their chair, who are being suggested to go into a group 2 type chair with a similar setup. The only problem you run into with that is that a group 3 chair has far more flexibility. It has the ability to add on and change and adjust, and group 2 chairs are not built that way. Group 2 chairs are pretty much a sit and drive type chair with some powered seating added to it. It doesn't change the ability or it doesn't help the ability to add on certain things later on. It's more limited. So with folks having to be in the chair that they get for 5 years, and in some funding sources it's longer than 5 years, putting them into that type of chair is not going to meet their long-term needs over that entire 5-year period. And unless there's a change in medical condition, there's no option to get somebody a new chair during that 5 years. So if you have somebody who, let's say MS or ALS or something along those lines, now their condition may progress and their situation, may become worse. But it doesn't, it doesn't help them in the long run. So that's pretty much the United Healthcare challenges. They've been, probably the toughest folks to deal with during 2019. From usually it's Medicare or some state Medicaid somewhere that's creating some of these challenges. But this year United Healthcare gets the prize, and we just want you to know that we're working as Permobil and as an industry to try and address these issues with them. Moving on to Active Height. Active Height, from a funding perspective, Medicare and most funding sources that follow Medicare guidelines do not cover seat elevator. There are some exceptions based on good medical justification that funding sources will make some exceptions to their rules. But Elevate and Standing, both of those they don't fit neatly into the normal funding model from a funding perspective. So a lot of times we're looking for alternative funding methods for these types of products as well.
So historically, Permobil has raised the bar when it comes to out-of-the-box power seat functions. Active Height, Active Reach, and Standing are what we're going to talk about right now. As a clinician, often I get asked, how do I justify or try to explain to the paying source why Active Height or Active Reach or Standing is going to be beneficial to my patient? And I always challenge a therapist to think, what do you do on your daily basis that requires you to be in a standing position or something that is of a different height outside of a standard seating height? Our world is not made to be all at a seated height. If you think about brushing your teeth or toileting, getting dressed, or even putting on your makeup, all of that requires a height greater than sitting in a chair. So, trying to do your laundry or cooking, trying to reach across the stove while you're cooking from a seated position not only is quite difficult, but can also be extremely dangerous. And a lot of our patients sustain serious burns just from attempting to do this. So allowing them to raise their seat level in an active height will allow them to not only see what they're cooking at this time, but also prevent any harm that they may cause by accidentally dropping something in their lap. Think about trying to utilize your microwave or just reaching into the cupboards. Those of us that are height impaired, sometimes even getting into the cupboards in a standing position is a little bit challenging. So as you start to, meet with your patients and talk with them, their lives sit at a different level, and it's, they're at an unfair advantage. There's also a lot of medical need for Active Height. There's a lot of reduction in cervical strain. You're not having to constantly look up and tip your head back to see what's going on, as well as the shoulder preservation. We're not constantly having to reach overhead. So in addition to Active Height, adding in Active Reach gives our patients just that much more of a benefit. So Active Reach not only allows us to come up to that height, but then to reach further into that situation. So if you think about in this situation with our patient sitting at the countertop, not only is she up at countertop level, but now she can raise herself even more slightly in an anterior position that she probably will be able to grab whatever's across her desk or reach her glass at a, from the table, and then constantly, prevent a lot of that shoulder strain or just, balance points by trying to reach things that are out of her arm's reach. So continued clinical support for the active reach, going back to those same daily activities and household activities that we talked about with Seat Elevate, or excuse me, Active Height. Brushing your teeth, getting up to that height, great, but now can you reach the faucet to do this on your own? Or do you now need to call in your caregiver or your spouse or your child to help turn the water on and off? Toileting, for a lot of our gentlemen, being able to come to a more upright position to toilet is a better way to empty your bladder than attempting to do a pivot transfer or, doing a seated transfer for toileting. Getting dressed and even putting on makeup, being able to see in the mirror a little bit more clearly. Our laundry activities, reaching into the washing machine. A lot of top load washers, if you're height impaired, you can't see the bottom, and so you might be missing laundry that's in there. And that same cooking activity, being able to see what's over there, being able to safely remove things off of the stove, utilizing the microwave, and then reaching into cupboards and just transfers in general. Being able to transfer in and out of a chair on your own is going to increase your independence and allow you to be more, active and change more positions throughout your day. So one of the things that Permobil has really prided ourselves in is definitely in power standing. It is something that we've strongly believed in and we've done for many, many years. And what we have noticed with power standing, what we promote with power standing, is that participation in everyday activities, returning to your life roles, being able to do things that we take for granted, being able to stand. So if you think about the activities of your daily life and all the stuff that you do in standing, there's an easy way to justify it towards your patients is how this world reacts in a standing position versus seated. So not only do we have the medical benefits of it, the increased bone density, you can have a significant reduction in spasticity. Bowel and bladder management is pretty key. Any of us therapists that have stood a patient for the first time, whether in a dynamic or static stander, have experienced the changes that a patient sustains with bowel and bladder management, whether their caregiver refers to it later on. It definitely is an improvement with constipation and UTIs. Standing alone can also give a significant amount of pain reduction. And we've had therapists mention to us in the past that do a lot of standing that their patients' pain medication usage has greatly decreased. And they've been able to manage a lot of their pain by just utilizing standing. And on top of it, continuing with the shoulder preservation, being able to reach at an appropriate height is going to maintain those shoulders for a lot longer. Functionally, a lot of our states that we work with that do a heavy amount of standing chairs look at not only those medical benefits, but really focus on the functional benefits. How are those activities going to be improved with that standing chair, and is it going to allow our patient to be independent and reduce their caregiver usage by just being able to come in and out of standing more independently throughout the day? And the list continues. You can think about all the stuff that you've done from the minute you got up this morning to the time you sat down for this webinar, and think about everything that you've done in a standing position. That's the type of thing that your patients are going to need to do as well.
Seating and positioning, back in or earlier, probably late spring or so, April, May timeframe, I believe, Noridian, who is the Medicare contractor for jurisdictions A and D, put out a memo reiterating the fact that wheelchair seat and back cushions are expected to be bound by the 5-year useful lifetime rule. This isn't new. This is something that has been kind of ebbing and flowing over the last, at least during my time during being involved in the industry. But there has historically been exceptions in the past where if a cushion is broken down to a point where it's causing more harm than good, and it's medically documented in a fashion that warrants the need for a new replacement cushion, we could get some of those paid and processed by insurance. Right now, today, basically what they're saying is that when something goes wrong with a cushion, they expect it to be repaired. I'm for one still trying to figure out how you repair foam, but that's the nature of the beast that we're dealing with right now. When you're doing a repair, you're not replacing an entire product. You may be replacing a cushion and maybe a back shell, but no hardware. Or maybe you're just getting a new replacement piece of foam, but not replacing the cover. Whenever you don't have a complete product, you don't have to worry about the PDAC code verification and finding a particular cushion on the PDAC website for payment, because you're not replacing a complete product. You are just repairing. It's kind of like when when you replace tires or batteries or something on a power wheelchair, you're replacing the batteries, but technically you're repairing the power wheelchair. Same concept with seating. If you're just providing a new cushion without a cover or no shell or no hardware, it's not a complete product. And at that point, each of those individual components fall under K0108, which I know isn't the greatest code in the world from a funding perspective, because of it not being able to be paid cleanly on a first swipe. It usually requires additional information be sent in and more manual review. So I understand the challenges with that, but based on the guidelines that we're faced with currently, that's the way that things are working right now. Now, will it revert back to some point of those exceptions? I mean, even under the current guidelines, I've been hearing of a few cases here and there where replacement cushions are getting turned over on appeal after they've been denied for this reason. So it's not that there's not a way to replace it. It's just it's not guaranteed, and it's going to take a lot more work than trying to take care of these products through a repair process. Please feel free to reach out. If you run into these issues or you're getting some sort of pushback from a particular funding source, we're always here to help try and help you through those processes and get you to a good outcome.
So with the 5-year useful lifetime ruling in place, it does kind of put as therapists in a little bit of an interesting situation. Our equipment suppliers are coming to us and asking for our help in how we can, essentially get rid of the foam that's dead and get our patients underneath on a surface that they truly need. And so some basic questions to kind of ask yourself as you go into one of these evaluations is, does this seating system even still meet my patient's needs? Did they require the seating system early on and now they've changed medically or posturally, and so therefore the foam itself is not meeting their needs, and they maybe need something more aggressive, or maybe they now need to have more pressure relieving properties on their seated surface? Is it still a viable option for them? Is it a possibility that maybe the backrest works really great, but the cushion isn't doing the job anymore, and they're starting to have issues with positioning or with skin impairment? So can you save one piece and change another? And the biggest thing is are there signs of anatomical breakdown related to the seating system? So related to that seated surface, meaning is that our patients getting, any type of pressure impairment, even slightly, from just that seating, that cushion, that foam not meeting that 5-year useful lifetime rule?
Alternative funding. There are a ton of different options out there when it comes to alternative means of helping folks get the equipment they need. Local reuse programs is one, upgrade programs from manufacturers, demo chair sales, private pay. care credit is becoming a much more mainstream. As a provider has to, you know, be a provider within the care credit organization for that to for that one to work. But it's a great way to help people take care of, you know, high copays, or if something's not covered, you know, you can apply. It's kind of like a credit card, but it's for healthcare expenditures only. Um, so that, you know, that's a good option. If you need more details around that, we have information that we're more than happy to share if you need it. Social media, GoFundMe is huge. We had a consumer earlier this year, maybe it was tail end of last year, but sometime recently, was looking to get a smart drive and was going through the rigmarole of trying to get it paid for through insurance, and was getting a lot of pushback. And finally, he got fed up. He started a GoFundMe, and within 2 days, he had raised enough money to pay cash for his smart drive. Um, you know, it's pretty simple to set up. You know, it allows, whether it's people you know or people you've never met in your life from halfway around the world, you know, it gives them the ability to help pitch in to help you get the equipment you need. So, you know, that's a pretty good tool when it comes to, you know, some of these advanced technologies and things that funding sources have a, you know, have a hard time paying for one reason or another. And then lastly, the Able Now accounts. This is basically kind of like almost like a 401k or a retirement plan, but it's geared towards medical needs and so forth. So again, I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on that. If you need more details, please feel free to reach out. We'll get you the information you need to head down that path. And then recently, Permobil, we created a document. I believe it's about 2 or 3 pages long. This is just a screenshot, so I can't scroll down and show you the whole thing. But it's a great resource of different alternative funding resources. You know, it's you know, places like the Permobil Foundation, Voc Rehab Services in each state. The E-Special Needs Funding Resource, I mean, that's a great spot because you go in there and you can see, I don't know, there's probably 50 different options of, you know, special interest groups or people who have set up, you know, funds for this type of purpose. You can also go through your, you know, your medical condition societies like the ALS and MS and, you know, United Spinal, you know, all of these organizations are out there trying to help people get the equipment that they need, because, you know, right now technology has advanced to a point where funding has not kept up. So in order to keep people moving and being as independent and free to do the things they want to be able to do, you know, we're trying to help provide as much information around funding so that people don't get left out or shortchanged over a financial situation. This is the website where you can go to the Permobil US website. You can click through, or you can just copy this link here and it'll take you right to the page. It is down towards the bottom since it's new. It's you know, so you'll have to scroll down to the bottom of the page to find it, but it's a great document. I think it'll be helpful, you know, when you get into a situation of trying to help somebody through some alternative funding methods. And that's all the information that we have to present today. We'd be happy to entertain any questions at this time.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank everybody for attending today and also thank our speakers for this great information. As a reminder, you do have a questions tab where you can type your questions, and we do have a few questions already. So I will jump right into them. I'll rewind all the way back to the manual topics. And the first question for you guys is, can you tell us where in the Medicare supplier manual it states that you can't just pay for the titanium, the upgrade fee for the titanium?
You know, that's kind of an interesting question because it's not specifically stated in their policy language. This is something where they came back 20 plus years after the fact, claiming that they had taken all these, special materials into consideration when they developed the code and the fee schedule back in the early 90s. And then as far as being in actual policy, it's not there, but there have been some like memos or Medlearn Matters type publications that talk about it specifically. If you need us to track down that and get it to you, we're happy to do that. But you will not find it in the local coverage. You won't see it in the supplier manual. This is something that has been done through kind of addendums. But we'd be happy to get you the information if you need it.
Great, thanks. And a follow-up to that, Jim, is someone asked, can I use an ABN for the titanium upgrade?
You can use an ABN for the titanium upgrade.
Okay. And let's see, moving into the power questions a little bit. One question is United Healthcare denying the E2377 and E2213 codes, or are they saying it's included in the reimbursement for the base or the power functions?
They're denying it, saying that it's not necessary. I mean, there may be some other, I've not seen consistent denials. Most of what I'm seeing is the fact that they're saying that it's not necessary for the functionality of the chair, so they're denying it that way. As far as it being rolled into the reimbursement, I have not heard that as a reason in any of the cases that I've worked on over the course of this year. So to me, it's a denial straight up, and just saying that it's not necessary. So, I've had more conversations with United Healthcare around this issue than I had ever hoped I would have to. But they are reading verbatim in the policy, and basically the policy, the way that it's worded, says something to the effect of an expandable controller is necessary for 3 or more actuators when they're being operated through the drive control. Okay, so now that's not the way that chairs are built. That's not the way that, the intent of the language has been for the last 13 years. And now all of a sudden, United Healthcare has come out with this new interpretation of that rule. And, it's creating some issues, obviously, because none of the manufacturers are able to accommodate what they're asking for or what they're claiming we can do. So again, it's a situation where it's not as clean and easy path to get to a resolution here, because now we have to go outside of United Healthcare and work with the folks at Medicare to get them to update their policy or clarify their policy language so that United Healthcare can interpret it properly. The intent of using an expandable controller is different from how it's worded in the policy. So we need to get that cleaned up so that we can move past this. Great,
thank you. I have another more end user specific questions and therapy specific. One lady says, I've been struggling with funding for the better part of a year. Can I purchase just the frame to accommodate my posture needs without having to pay for the whole thing?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if we have that capability or not. I mean, that's a logical solution. Make sure that we have this person's contact information, because I'd like to do a little bit of homework and research that and see if that is something that we're capable of doing, because that might be another avenue that we could explore. The only thing you run into there is if you just buy a frame, then there's going to be a lot of labor and work to add all the different components to that frame that maybe are from a previous chair or something along that line. Typically we don't just sell a wheelchair frame without everything else added to it. So if you were to buy a frame, then you're going to have to figure out how to get all your accessories and seating and all that, everything configured and set up just the right way. So there may be some issues within that, but let me do a little bit more research on that, and I'll be happy to get back in touch with the question.
Great. And one more, a little different. Where would therapists find information about the coverage available for the individual states' guidelines?
Typically, I assume that means state Medicaid programs.
I assume so.
You know, typically, you know, there is no one go to one page and be able to look up all 50 states. It's not that neat and clean. But generally what you're going to go to the state Medicaid website. You're going to look up the DMEPOS, DMEPOS, or DME policy manual. And then depending on what type of product you're looking for, you'll just do a search on whether it's you know, power assist, or whether it's standing, or whether it's seat elevators. There will be language within that manual that states where their stance is on coverage or non-coverage. If you're in a particular state and you're struggling to find that information, again, please reach out. I'm happy to help direct you or find it for you and send it to you. You know, just to keep things simple. I know everybody's super busy and we're all fighting and trying to do the best for you know, all of our patients that we can. So if there's something I can do to help that along, to help you understand whether something's covered or not, more than happy to do that for you.
Great. And one sort of related question, as a consumer, where can I go to learn all the codes and abbreviated terms that were used?
Yeah, that would be something where we would probably just have to send out a document. We would have to go back through and kind of scrub the presentation and see what all we utilize. Unfortunately for me, I deal with codes and funding and coverage and all this stuff, you know, full time every single day. So unfortunately I take for granted that the entire audience knows what I'm speaking of. So I apologize for sounding like I was speaking in tongues, but I would be happy to go back through and put together a document that spells out what the codes are, what the abbreviations mean, and so forth, because it's important for everybody involved in this process to know and understand what's happening and how it works. And you know, a lot of times the consumer is going to be the biggest advocate for the fight in getting covered equipment in the first place. They above all need to know and understand the process that they're going through and how it works and what options are available and things along those lines. So as part of the, you know, the after questions and so forth, we will put that document together and send it back out.
Great. That would be amazing. Quote. We do have a few more questions that I don't believe we'll have time to answer today, so we will get back to you via email after the webinar. So we apologize, we ran out of time, but before we go, I would like to invite you to next month's webinar. You can sign up on the website, or email reminders will be coming out soon as well. So on screen you can see we'll be talking about seating and positioning standards next month. And there were also several questions regarding a copy of the presentation or handouts of just the slides that were presented. And it is a pretty fluid topic, so we did not print the handouts for you guys today, but we did record the webinar, and it will be posted onto the website. All pre-registered attendees will automatically get a link to the webinar a couple of hours after it's over today. It will, like I said, also be posted to the Permobil Academy section of the permobilus.com website for future reference. Included in the email you will receive in a couple of hours today is a link to generate your certificate of attendance if you'd like one, along with an optional survey to provide feedback and share any new webinar ideas that you'd like to suggest for the future. We'd like to thank you all for attending today, and we hope you have a very good day.